I am someone who really resisted this concept. I resisted it for years. And honestly, if I didn't get injured and get a concussion and have things so bad the way that they were, that I was barely able to read a book, I still am not sure if I would have believed this. I'm still not sure I would have believed in the potential power that the skull has to unlock so many other injury patterns we have within our body. Hi, I'm Lianne Balazsi, osteopath, mom, and lifelong student of how the body truly heals. With backgrounds in psychology, athletic therapy, and occupational therapy, I've spent over a decade helping women cut through the noise of the wellness world to get back to feeling like themselves again. Strong, clear, and grounded. Here, we explore the physical, mental, and spiritual sides of well-being so you can realign your energy, restore your rhythm, and reinvent your life from the inside out. This is the Holistish Podcast. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. I'm an osteopath, not a medical doctor, and this podcast is for informational purposes only. The content shared here is based on my personal experience in education in health and holistic wellness. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have about your own particular situation and your health. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's get on with the show. It's really wild when you are out and about in your everyday life, when you're an osteopath, and you try to explain to people what you do. Because honestly, it really doesn't look like we do much. Some people have told me if they go out to get a session with an osteo, they basically say, she put her hands on me. I felt like she did nothing, but I feel better now. But because I didn't feel like she did anything, it can't be that, right? This answer can go two ways. It can either be that this person's palpation was very precise, and when you have the right intention in your hands, you're not necessarily going to feel a bunch of high pressure going all the way down to where your pain is. It also depends how sensitive you are and what kind of sensation you have in the zone that person is working. So it might be that they're actually really on cue and really honing in on a certain zone, and you won't really perceive it because you may not have enough receptors there to feel that pressure in that zone. And honestly, we don't have to press very hard because we actually accumulate tensions one on top of the other. So it's not like we dig all the way down to the zone. So say I'm trying to get to your kneecap, and yeah, I can put my fingers to kind of just pinch right on the surface of the skin of the kneecap. But I can then accumulate pressure with the skin to then go get to the next level around the fascia, and then might get into some tendons or other fascia that's kind of encircling around. And finally, I'll hit the bone. But you can either press super hard with a lot of force, or you can get there super lightly by just accumulating each layer of tissue that is in that zone. So usually what osteopaths are doing is they're not necessarily pushing with a lot of force. Some are really just have a light touch, but they're really able to stack the layers really efficiently. Now, that being said, I come from an athletic therapy background, so I was used to really forcing and pushing and straining my fingers a lot. And one of the reasons why I couldn't really continue in athletic therapy was because I knew I couldn't keep pressing. I had like these hyper lax thumbs, and I would always use my thumbs to press into people's like shins and different zones where they had pain and I had to go work. And my thumbs couldn't take it. I feel like I'd have osteoarthritis in my thumbs at this point if I had stayed in that profession. So that being said, I still am someone who pushes a little more. People tend to feel my palpation a little more than others where others claim they have such a light touch that they don't really feel much. Neither one is particularly wrong. It really depends on what the osteopath has in their experience and what works best for them in order to get the information they need. And it also will end up being dependent on what the patient prefers. Sometimes the patient will want to feel that the hands are really on something, maybe just to confirm that they're actually doing something. But some really prefer the super light touch that really can just bring a calming effect for them. So it all comes down to preference. So if ever you go to a session and you find you're not necessarily feeling like anything's happening, it's possible. It all comes down to, at the end of the day, what you feel you received, and if you feel there's a difference, whether they touch to the certain pressure you want or not. So always pay attention to the end result, how you feel when you walk out, how you feel in the next few days, and then reassess and see if that's really the right approach or person for you. Now, one zone that kind of always becomes a bit of debate is when we say we are addressing the skull. Working the skull for many people seems way out there. They think that's just a bunch of quackery. What's the point in touching someone's head? There's just the neck that connects to the head and all the other bones of the head, with the exception of the jaw, which moves for us to speak. Nothing moves. Well, I am here to beg to differ, and I'm here to tell you that that is not true. Now, when we are babies, we are born with the cranial bones not actually fully connected. So that's why you see, when you look at a skull, you'll see different lines connecting all around the skull. And these are called the sutures. So they say by the time we hit about 18 months to 2 years, that's when these sutures will fuse together. The reason we don't come out like that is because in order to pass through the birth canal, the head actually gets compressed quite a bit in order to get through. But then once baby comes out, then the shape will take its full form. And then over the next few months, then finally those cranial bones will start to fuse together. So where they fuse is at these sutures. And the sutures themselves, when you look at the histology of it, it doesn't become fully calcified to the point where there's absolute rigidity, like when you recover from a fracture. When you zoom in, there's actually different layers of bone, then cartilage, and just malleable tissue that make it that, yes, from a naked eye, the skull looks like it's actually fused solid. But when you go and analyze down in this deep level, you actually see that there's slight, I'm not saying big, but slight rebound going on in those areas. And that can be to accommodate to different pressure going on in the skull. And it can be for also just going with the pumping effect of all the fluids that go around the brain in that area. So it doesn't mean that you have a huge movement that you can see expand and contract in your skull. It's more on a very, very, question of millimeters. Much with what most of what we do in a treatment session. It's usually a case of millimeters. And I'm someone who used to be so skeptical about the fact that these millimeters can make such a big difference in someone's life. But once I started to really be able to feel, and feeling at this level of the skull took me years. I started out in my studies, ready to press hard, show presence in the body, and really induce the result that I wanted. But it was only once I took a step back and started receiving the information that I actually started to feel what the skull was saying. And again, it took me years to feel it. And honestly, I don't know if I would have actually ever really paid this much attention to the skull and be praising the skull's treatments if it weren't for my own stories. Like, I'm someone who suffered multiple concussions, and I got to a point where I had 2 years of post-concussion syndrome. And I did all the protocols like I learned in athletic therapy. I took my time away from screens. I took my time away from, doing homework and reading and watching TV. I rested, I slept, I hydrated. I tried to, one of the protocols in athletic therapy is that you really have to rebuild back up your activity levels, because as you do exercise and bring up your blood pressure, and that blood pressure that goes up to the brain, it can bring on symptoms again. So you have to really scale back and rest and listen to your body if the symptoms kick in as you're doing physical activity and increasing your heart rate. So what would happen to me was I would just go and try to focus on homework and I'd get symptoms. So it was very hard even to go and do a walk, let alone get back to doing sports and training like I used to and get back to my studies. So what actually happened for me, and again, this is me being a skeptic thinking I can't feel anything in the skull at this point in my osteopathy studies, but I got this concussion during my osteopathy studies. So I am one of the biggest skeptics in my class. I have teachers praising the skull and how miraculous it can be. And I'm desperate at this point. So I actually go see a different osteopath. I'd seen one who helped me with back pain, etc. But I went to go see one who really, really focused on the craniosacral unit as the big functional unit. And I'll be honest, I didn't always feel what she was doing. But that's also because I was brand new to being a student and also being a patient. And when she put her hands on my skull, over time, I got to feel more and more what was happening. And her movements were so slight. It was almost like she wasn't doing anything. But I started to be able to feel, because I was zoning into that, my attention into that zone where she was working. And I tell you, the results became so profound that I couldn't unsee it anymore, how powerful it can be when the skull is actually released. It took me about a year to undo my post-concussion syndrome once I started with her. But I found out I had layers upon layers upon layers of blockages that were subtle, that you wouldn't know if you're not trained to see it. But I would undo one blockage, and then it would reveal that I actually had an impact somewhere else in my head from another injury, and I remember what it was. It was just one blow after another that when I actually got this concussion that took me out for almost 2 years, the hit itself, funny enough, was not that hard. But I had so many accumulations of all these different impacts on my head that my head was just like, enough, I can't move anymore. I'll say it again. It was really like there was no movement of millimeters to adapt to all the different impacts I had and just little blockages I had going on in my cranial bones, that I was completely dysfunctional. Quick pause for a second. I just wanted to take a moment to say if this material is resonating with you, I would love for you to come and join my free community over on School. That's skool.com. The group I have is called Ask the Osteopath, and we talk about all different types of topics around your health and well-being. Yes, there's foundations in osteopathy, but we keep it to a broader range all around holistic health and wellness in order to optimize your everyday well-being. So if this sounds like a place you'd like to be, I invite you to go to school.com/osteo. And now, back to the episode. So this is my personal story about the cranial sphere. But then I started to pay attention more to it as a student, and I started to really get that belief out of my head that this is useless, and I actually started to listen more and more to how the skull could be having an impact on other people's bodies. And what I found was really profound. Honestly, it was the biggest unlock in my clinical practice to this day, because it really started to solidify that one of the basic principles of osteopathy is that the big ones you have to unlock in order to unlock everything else is the sphenobascular symphysis, which is a connection between the sphenoid and the occiput. And then you also, with that, have to make sure that the sacrum is mobile, so that this way the occiput is freed as well as the sacrum, and they do a synchronized pumping movement that goes all along your spine. And when you have this movement intact, it allows for all the other movements to be able to occur. So this is why I tell my patients when they first come to see me for the very first time, and I know they've never been to another osteopath before, but in most cases I still do it anyway because often there is a need. I tell them, look, you're coming to me for example, a shoulder issue. That's all perfectly good and fine. it's possible that the shoulder's not going to get addressed today, because the very first thing that I need to make sure is clear is your skull at the SBS, the sphenomasseter symphysis, as well as at the sacrum. And it doesn't mean that the whole skull is going to have to be 100% free and that the whole pelvis has to be 100% free. But we at least have to have a minimal amount of that movement going on in order to really start getting any kind of results anywhere else. So at one point, if we get that SBS open, it may open up for a window of time in order to help you to get results. But if you keep finding that the skull keeps closing up again and again and again, that's because, yes, the SBS is powerful. We can open it in order to do some results. But if it keeps closing on its own, there's more to do with the skull. And there's even times when I will be assessing someone's legs, for example, or their knees, and everything pulls me up to the skull. And it seems so counterintuitive. You're like, the person's got something wrong in their leg. Why the heck am I spending 85% of my time in the session at the skull? And this all comes down to, again, that you got to go for the primary cause. So it might be that this person didn't necessarily present with a whole blockage of their skull that was giving them headaches and dysfunction or post-concussion syndrome-like symptoms. But it's possible at one point that they had something that was off. It could be that they cracked their neck a weird way and then certain bones of the skull adapted to that. And now their whole posture has been shifted in order to accommodate for this shift above. Because the head will always try to preserve a horizontal look of your eyes. It's very rare that you'll see someone with a tilted eyes with one eye above the other, because their whole world's going to look tilted. So most people will try to preserve, to the best of their ability, that horizontal look of their eyes. But when you're someone like me, who can see little details now in someone's face structure, in their skull and their neck, when I look someone in the eyes, I can often tell if someone has something off in their skull or their neck or in that area, because they may have some asymmetries going on in their face that reveal that there's stuff going on at the skull. Sometimes you can even go, oh, like you have some strain in your eye, and they'll be like, whoa, that's weird. And how did you know that? And it can be subtleties like just one eye looks more open than the other. And that all comes down to not necessarily that there's a problem with someone's vision or their eye. It could actually be that there's tension somewhere in the chain along the base of their skull. And then that puts extra pressure in the front. So it sounds like a big mouthful of what I'm giving you guys here today. But at the end of the day, I think the message I really want to get across is, just because the skull seems to be fused, it does not mean that it doesn't mean that there isn't anything to check out there. I have had so many surprising sessions where I think I have to work in a different zone, or the zone where they're saying their complaint is. And it has been wild how many times I'm stuck at the skull. And I try to, do the basic minimum so I can get to the zone that they're complaining about or more around that area. And the skull won't let me. I will correct things, I will unblock, and I go, okay, this must be enough. I got a bit of movement here. Let's see if I can move on. And then I retest everything to see if I'm free to go to the next place. And the skull goes, no. So it's been very funny conversations with my clients as I try to convince them, like, look, it's not because I just want to hang out at your head all day. It's really because there's something deeper here that we need to unlock. And funny enough, it happens all the time. When you get the primary cause, when you clear out the main zone where the problem's happening, the rest starts to unravel so much more efficiently. I tell people all the time, look, like, you're coming with me for a knee problem. Yeah, I can go and I can work on your knee this whole time and you'll feel really good because I touched the place where you're hurting. And you know what? For a couple hours, you might feel like I loosened some stuff up because, yeah, I can do all these different techniques. I learned a lot of techniques for the knee. But I'll be honest, I don't use 85% of those techniques because most of the time, there's a problem coming from somewhere else, and then I finally make my way to the knee, and it takes 1 or 2 techniques to unlock it, and then everything's fine. And of course, this will vary depending on if this is a pain that came out of nowhere. Hint, hint. If this pain comes out of nowhere, you don't have a trauma pattern, you don't have an injury pattern, you don't have a history of surgery in that area, chances are that's a compensation, and the osteo doesn't need to spend a lot of time there. The osteo may need to go there in the end to really just do the final touches to get it back in place. But it's very, very rare that someone will go and just spend an hour on your knee just because that's what you want. And then finally, you get up from the table, you feel good, you walk out 2 hours later, and the pain comes back, and everything's back the way it was. And if that's happening, that means your osteo's not digging deeper enough. If you have gone to see the osteopath for the exact same problem, the exact same pain, the exact same pattern, and it's been 3 to 5 sessions and they're just repeating the exact same techniques over and over again, you need a second opinion because that's not how it works. And funny enough, a lot of the times when I have to do these kinds of solving the actual primary issue versus the compensation pattern, in my experience, more often than not, the problem is the skull. And we can go into a bunch of reasons of why that is. But I think one of the most interesting ones that can be explored here is that the skull actually has a lot of bones that mimic the movements that we find in the pelvis. So I'll give you a few examples so you can understand the patterns here. So if we look at the jaw, the mandible, we actually have a kind of ball and socket joint going on right at your jaw. We have, and the jaw, the mandible, more specifically the TMJ joint, actually mimics a lot of patterns that are in the coxofemoral joint. So that's your hip bone. So let's get one thing straight and clear. The coxofemoral joint has a lot more angles of movement than the jaw, but the jaw still has a lot of rounded structures that we can actually shift the jaw from side to side. We can go up and down. And if an osteo actually, goes to work at the TMJ, we can actually do some twisting motions, some angling motions, similar to in the hip. So sometimes you will have a hip issue, and in the end, we'll work the jaw. If it calls for us to go and work the skull, chances are we're ending up working on the TMJ. And if you've never had TMJ pain, you're going, this is so weird. Why are they doing that? But there's actually movement patterns that are similar, that mirror each other, and they have links through the fascia that if one's stuck, it can pull on the other end. So we can actually really lock up things from a distance. Another example is your temporal bone. And your temporal bone is the bone that covers all around your ear canal. When you look at a temporal bone, really zoomed in, it actually has a lot of similar shape to your iliac bones. And there's different structures that line up, that you have part of the temporal bone that comes to help to start shaping the beginning of your cheekbones. And that is actually like your symphysis pubis. So that's like your pubic branches that come and link together to make your pubic bone. You actually have the back parts of your temporal bones that go and articulate with your occiput. The back of your temporal bone and your occiput join together, and that actually mimics and reflects what's going on at your SI joint. So if you have SI joint pain and there's actually no problem in your pelvis, I highly encourage you to double check the suture that's your temporal bone and your occiput. Sometimes the blockage is happening there and it's pulling all the way down to your SI joint. And one of the more obvious ones, one of the most obvious links, because I described it a bit earlier, is your occiput and your sacrum. They have the exact same movement when we try to get their rhythms going, and they connect it directly through the spine. So if one is blocked in a certain position, often in the other end, whether it's the occiput that's a primary issue or the sacrum that's a primary issue, the other is going to reflect that same pattern. And the same goes for your temporal bones with your iliacs. Same goes with your jaw, with your hips. So it's really important to discern where is the right place to start looking in order to get your relief. The funny part is just unlocking the belief that the skull is useless. It's not useless because that's where it holds our brain and how we speak and all these wonderful things. But there is still an actual pattern of movement that can help unlock so many problems that you have throughout your body. And if you're still skeptical about this, I completely get it, because I am someone who really resisted this concept. I resisted it for years. And honestly, if I didn't get injured and get a concussion and have things so bad the way that they were, that I was barely able to read a book, I still am not sure if I would have believed this. I'm still not sure I would have believed in the potential power that the skull has to unlock so many other injury patterns we have within our body. So I hope this has been helpful and that it just allows you to open up your mind a little bit in order to see what potential by unlocking your skull can actually lead for the rest of the patterns in your body. We really want to stick to structure governs function, and sometimes the structure of the skull is going to play a role in that, but also we need to get to the primary issue. So if your osteopath is telling you your primary issue is at the skull, I highly invite you to just let them explore that with you and see what kind of results you get. Thanks for tuning in to the Holistish podcast. If this episode helped you see your health or your life in a new light, I'd love for you to share it with a friend. Or tag me on Instagram at the.holistish so we can spread the message that healing isn't all or nothing. It's holistic-ish. Until next time, keep listening to your body, leading with curiosity, and living in alignment from the inside out.